Falcon and the Winter Soldier. Oh boy. A show that I've had thoughts on for a long time. Most notably, how promising it was initially, only to be completely screwed up, resulting in a mediocre at best show. Maybe enough to pass the time, but not enough to stand out from the continuous flow of unadulterated feces spewing from Marvel at this point, forcing out content like a Ford assembly line in order to keep people subscribed to Disney+. The simple matter of the fact is that it was not until this show that I saw Falcon exclusively as black. Before, he was just another Avenger, one that had the benefit of being in some of the best movies in the MCU. Now, every time I see him, I can't help but be constantly reminded of racial politics and his identity within that framework. People would have you believe that this is a continuation of Captain America's story, while making the ballsy decision to tackle politics head-on, and those who don't like it are simply just triggered. Reality is that this show is a political and narrative mess that does not have much to offer outside of maybe an initially interesting premise and an action scene or two. So without further ado, let us begin. The show is one of the few pieces of media in the MCU post-Endgame that actually deal with the fallout of the blip, which caused huge amounts of chaos shortly after people just began to settle down with a new reality. People got to move into new homes that were suddenly vacated. Certain jobs were more in demand, and there was more than likely plenty of resources to go around. All of a sudden, your rich neighbor down the street got snapped, and his Porsche Taycan is just sitting in the driveway along with his mansion. I mean, who really is going to care if you move in? But now he's back, and, well, no surprise, he wants his shit back. Take that instance, and now extend it to the entire world. A pretty big logistical issue. However much joy there is in seeing the world return, some people aren't too happy, and would rather have the world return to the way it was before the blip, and they are now making moves. Falcon must deal with this problem, as well as wrestling with the mantle and legacy of Captain America, as well with the United States. This show doesn't really do anything especially well. In most areas, it has some level of competency, but nothing stands out either. The performances are decent for the most part, but Anthony Mackie had a real chance to stand out here. I have never found him to be particularly good in any of his other films, and unfortunately, he was just about okay, as was everybody else. The action was also disappointing. This show largely follows the path laid out by Winter Soldier and Civil War, which focused on much tighter and visceral combat, which proved to be a perfect formula, containing some of the best action in the MCU. Although this show attempts to ape the style captured in these films, it does not succeed. I know comparing a film to a show, especially in the realm of action, is not a fair comparison, but in today's day and age, the idea that shows cannot have great action is simply wrong, especially coming from Marvel Studios, who should certainly have the resources to do so. The one thing that stood out to me about the MCU is that even when the movie itself was never that great or had issues, I could always rely on some great action. Say what you will about Iron Man 2, but tell me this action isn't good. Unfortunately, the show has mostly mediocre action, meaning that it might be entertaining enough in the moment, but will not be something you remember in the long run. It's just there to keep you engaged as much as it needs to. Like, what is this? He just pushes a pole down and then bum rushes 30 rifles? What? The opening sequence was well done, and I did enjoy this one scene of the Winter Soldier. However, this highlighted the issue with Bucky, in that his best action is when he's allowed to use lethal force. Without guns, knives, and explosives, he's forced to just fight, and honestly in the show, he never really shows up. He has been severely nerfed. The Winter Soldier went toe-to-toe with Captain America, and now he is borderline struggling with these random people on steroids. His action sequences often see him pretty heavy on his feet and devoid of any arsenal. There was this one time where he got a knife and then he just threw it away. For a character as cool as the Winter Soldier, he definitely has gotten a downgrade. Many of the fights they find themselves in, especially in the 4th episode, are in small interiors, hallways, tight corridors, the insides of buildings, which don't really lend to Falcon's style of fighting. So the quality of his action sequences can fluctuate wildly. The show's action seems to just be slightly awkward. Lacking a lot of fluidity would be my chief charge. We deal with a lot of super soldiers, but it mostly feels as just regular people fighting with some really exaggerated wire work. All of these issues are compounded when you have completely lackluster antagonists, and given how lackluster the antagonists are in the show, it only further illustrates the meandering action. Which brings me to another issue with the show, the terrorists.
You have to stop calling them terrorists.
Where to begin? These guys suck. This group is not nearly as intimidating as they need to be, and are nowhere close to becoming the sympathetic antagonists the show wants you to think they are. It honestly feels like a temper tantrum for the most part. A bunch of children finding power which they attempt to use for their own benefit until they realize the consequences are far more dire than they thought. The Flag Smashers are an organization of super soldiers with the express goal of getting the resources they once had back before the blip. On top of this, they have a connected network of sympathizers who they rely on for support. But given this motivation, it does not make sense why they start to kill people. Their primary goal should always be to steal more and more resources. The moment they start killing people, obviously things will get far more serious. It's really crazy how shows like Fauda and Homeland get you to understand where the terrorists in their respective shows are coming from. It may not be entirely fair to compare this level of prestige television with this mess, but come on. The fact that these shows do a better job showing where jihadi terrorists are coming from than the Flag Smashers is embarrassing. Shows like Fauda clearly illustrate the circle of violence that caused the terrorism they are dealing with. In the first season, a woman's husband is killed at her wedding when Israeli forces attempt to apprehend a terrorist at the scene. Enraged by this, she goes on to become a suicide bomber, targeting an Israeli bar, which obviously escalates and causes more and more violence. The situation gives you a clear through line as to cause and effect. The Flag Smashers are not sympathetic at all, claiming to enjoy the world when more than half of the earth was gone. Did none of these guys experience any loss of family? Or do they just want other people's shit that bad? These guys are just pissed they're not getting enough stuff anymore and to start killing people so they will be listened to or some shit. Whatever. What makes this even worse is that Falcon cannot bring himself to condemn the actions taken, refusing to call them terrorists even though that's exactly what they are, with very little explanation. The show seems to draw similarities with their plight with his, but the struggle to call terrorists for what they are only contribute to the frustration that I have with the show and as a result Falcon. Why would he feel this sympathetic to people who want the world to go back to a place when he was not there? And more importantly, the world they want to go back to did not even seem to help his family either. Even after she threatens Falcon's family and is just about to kill him, he still takes her side. I honestly don't know. Besides that none of their actions really make them that intimidating. They might be willing to blow up innocent guards, but come on, after all these guys have faced as Avengers, is this group really that intimidating? No. For example, the Flag Smashers set up a plan to kill Captain America, and in order to do so, lure him into a trap. While they attempt to kill him, his partner thwarts the attempt and dies in the process. But instead of fighting on to eliminate their target, the action just stalls. Suddenly, a wave of regret falls over the flag smashers and they just retreat? Why exactly? They knew he has a partner. If they are willing to kill people who get in their way, why do they feel so bad now? I don't know. Like, how intimidating is this group if they just get scared when they kill someone, but then just seem to get over that pretty quickly? Like, this guy was literally restraining Captain America so Carly could kill him minutes before and then just wants to surrender? Why?
Someone who understands that today's heroes don't have the luxury of keeping their hands clean.
It wasn't me!
Well, karma is a bitch.
I didn't think there could be another Captain America until I met you.
Fuck off. When it comes to injecting politics in media, it can be tricky. On one hand, there are many great pieces of media that skillfully inculcate politics that elevates not only the story, but also incites discussion, and potentially can even change minds. On the other hand, given today's current turbulent and polarized times, it's more than possible to just lecture your audience, meaning those who agree will clap and those who disagree will hate you. Threading the needle can be quite difficult, and great skill is involved to become the former rather than the latter. Well, this show plants its flag in the second camp, content to just lecture the audience. This is not a conversation, this is a lecture, and you will be educated. The common retort is that everything is actually political, and that all stories, as a result, are political, therefore anything goes. However, this really doesn't tell us anything. I mean, yes, everything can be interpreted some way, but you're kind of leaving out two important questions. How political is the story, and how well were the politics folded in? Obviously, the degree to which something is political matters. Are you really telling me that Clifford the Big Red Dog is as political as 1984 or Animal Farm? The degree to which a story is political will be on a spectrum, so the statement that everything is political is not useful when evaluating media. A good example of this is Star Wars, which was partially inspired by the Vietnam War, often cited as being extremely political, with the stormtroopers being a proxy for the United States, while the scrappy rebels represented Vietnam. I know there are many influences, but for the purposes of this video, let's stick to one. However, these are also people who tout Star Wars as a children's franchise, one about space wizards.
This is a film about space wizards intended for children. I'm not saying you shouldn't take it seriously, just maybe don't get too angry about it. We're not talking about gun control here. We're talking about a movie about space wizards intended for children.
I mean, how politically nuanced and complex can a franchise be if it primarily appeals to children? Besides, even if that is the case, Star Wars films have never been super interested in politics besides an initial premise. It mostly is about space adventures, following a cast of characters and their arcs rather than the political maneuverings of different factions throughout the galaxy and how that maps onto our world. The prequels, which delved the heaviest into politics, were also the most scrutinized, in part because many people found the political segments boring. The prequels, for whatever the Disney accounts want to tweet out, were wholly uninterested in the politics that govern the galaxy, skipping over the most interesting material, like how the First Order came to power, the state of the Republic at the time, and the resulting fallout from each faction's actions. The sequels were notorious for ignoring the political realities, but I guess you did get the ham-fisted Canto Bight sequence in The Last Jedi, if that is more your style. Taking a look at Star Wars now, which has two shows running, Andor and The Mandalorian. Andor being expressly more political than The Mandalorian, and just being a better show. However, The Mandalorian is far more emblematic and representative of what Star Wars is, and given that The Mandalorian is way more popular than Andor, only goes to prove the point. However quote-unquote political the Star Wars franchise is, at the end of the day most people view and consume them like action blockbusters. We are interested in cool new characters fighting and killing other cool characters in bigger battles with more and more people dying, looking upon the destruction with glee and cheers. That usually is not how people engage with narratives that are steeped in nuanced politics. Even if the original material is political, people can engage with said media in a completely different way. One of my last videos was discussing The Bourne Legacy, a film that has a lot to say about the American intelligence apparatus and the pharmaceutical industry here in America. However, most people didn't give a shit. The discussion exclusively centers around the action and pacing, with only a brief mention to the larger political themes in most discussions. And we have not even broached the topic of how skillfully the politics are weaved into the narrative itself, which should be the chief question. Without this, you're not commenting or analyzing how good the show or any piece of media is. You are just cheering for your point of view. Thus, the defense of the show insistence to tackle politics in a messy way from those who just wanted a fun, thriller-type Marvel show by stating that everything is political is a lazy argument. The MCU is generally a family-friendly action blockbuster franchise, and the idea to directly tackle real-life politics is inherently more risky. Acknowledging this fact should not be controversial. Up until now, when the MCU did have politics, it largely paralleled our world. There were discussions that mirrored our real world, the conversations surrounding government overreach versus individual actions, and how do people deal with such power like in Civil War. But spoiler alert, the Sokovia Accords is not an actual piece of legislation in the real world.
I'm saying there may be a causality. Our very strength invites challenge. Challenge incites conflict. And conflict breeds catastrophe. Oversight. Oversight is not an idea that can be dismissed out of hand.
God damn. Remember when the MCU had good writing? The issue with Falcon and the Winter Soldier is that it directly intersects with our real world, tackling the same politics we have in ours in a pretty messy way. I mean, I doubt even people who would disagree with what I just said would want the next Captain America movie to be about getting a girl across states to get an abortion or something. This is not to say that prohibits the MCU from tackling politics head-on, just to state that doing so is inherently more risky, requiring greater skill and nuance to pull it off, something this show severely lacks. Having the show tackle politics so heavily and then going right back to superhero fun in the next MCU installment is whiplash. Seeing Falcon not have to deal with any of this to then automatically having it be the centerpiece of his show is a change of situation. None of these situations feel natural for the most part, feeling wholly fabricated in order to put Falcon in certain situations contrary to the narrative. For money, he could have certainly gone to somebody to lend him money. Pepper could have given him a loan, or Doctor Strange could have just conjured up some gold. If he's willing to brainwash the Earth, then fabricating $100K should not be that big of a deal. Or literally anybody else. Hell, just write a book or something.
Because if there's one thing life's taught me, there's always room to grow.
This is not a conversation. Rather, the show is really only interested in lecturing, changing everything that would logically happen in the story to force the politics the writers want to tell, with everybody who is good having one particular point of view, and everybody who is bad having the opposing perspective. And there is no better example of this than the relationship and dynamic between Falcon and the Winter Soldier. The show presents this relationship in the least interesting way, with Bucky largely agreeing with Falcon politically, stating that he did not know what Falcon was going through giving the shield to a black man, which means that in order to force a rift between them, the show had to rely on melodrama.
See, he gave you that shield and you threw it away like it was nothing. So maybe he was wrong about you, and if he was wrong about you, then he was wrong about me.
Unfortunately, all of this is bullshit. The show pretends to be far more provocative than it actually is. The decision to go with this forced premise rather than what should obviously take place is a missed opportunity. Sam is a black man, growing up and living in what I can assume is the late 20th and early 21st century, while Bucky is a white guy from the fucking 1940s. To pretend that these guys would have anywhere close to the same outlook on race is delusional. If the show actually understood that the characters would naturally have very different outlooks on the United States, both in terms of race and politics, the show would have been far more interesting and memorable. Given these two characters would have very different perspectives, it could form a natural rift between the two, as the once close partners would find themselves drifting further apart due to politics, similar to what happened to the Avengers in Civil War. Bucky, seeing just how far the United States has come, does not see anything wrong with the US. As far as he knows, the promise has been fulfilled, and now everybody is treated equally under the law. If the show really wanted to go for it, Bucky could possibly even think the US has gone too far. And although that would have been far more interesting, people would obviously hate it. Listen, Bucky doesn't have to be like that Captain America from that comedy sketch.
Doc. I think we got a spy amongst us.
A spy? What?
The Jap kid.
I'm not spy.
He's Korean!
What the f does that mean? They're all the same?
What happened? He's so racist.
Well, he lived through the 1930s and 40s. I mean, it would stand to reason that it was completely acceptable back then for a white New Yorker to be absurdly racist.
But some understanding and care should go into figuring out how Bucky would naturally feel. Meanwhile, Sam is squarely in the other camp. Growing up black, he has distinct experiences. He has specific situations to call upon. His family and community are in situations that are not entirely of their own making. He believes that he would not be treated the same way, and just because things might appear to be good on paper does not mean that is in fact reality. Seeing these two opposing perspectives clash while simultaneously dealing with other problems would be a very natural reflection of what is going on in the United States today. Bucky might think Falcon is just overreacting, while Sam is hurt that his friend doesn't see eye to eye with him, especially when it affects him personally, which would make the show infinitely more interesting and real. But screw all that. Bucky agrees with Sam, and the show keeps on going on like nothing happens, instead just tossing out random lines as a substitute. This stupidity and lack of nuance goes on to culminate in the final speech, in which a whole bunch of narrative and character development has moved forward in a matter of minutes. Now, with Captain America giving a rousing, powerful speech to the inept politicians, telling them how to fix the problem.
People who reappeared only to find someone else living in their family home. They just end up homeless. Look, I get it, but you have no idea how complicated this situation is. You know what? You're right. And that's a good thing. I'm a black man carrying the stars and stripes. What don't I understand? Every time I pick this thing up, I know there are millions of people out there who are going to hate me for it.
Wait, what is this? Sam has already worn the stars and stripes. He served in the military beforehand. In fact, there are many black Americans every day who wear the stars and stripes. This is in no way an answer to the question being asked. He also goes on to state that people will hate him for this choice. But outside of angry people on Twitter, no one would be upset. All major institutions in America would champion this change. The government, corporations, banks, universities, and much more. This is absolutely not accurate to the America we are living in today.
Who's in the room with you when you're making those decisions? Is it the people you're going to impact? Or is it just more people like you?
I have an idea. The people get together, and given this is a room, for the sake of practicality, they pick a representative, and this representative will put forward the concerns. Wait, that's exactly what's happening. Fucking hell, kill me. This is the best illustration of how this show mishandles politics. Not only does it have problems establishing and explaining the problem, it seemingly has no solution either. The only thing it's capable of is lecturing. It's even more odd given that we are effectively talking about a government program that seeks to redistribute resources to those who need it the most, but given the complexities of the problem are struggling to do so. And so a bunch of terrorists believe that it should go back to them, or the people who were originally here. And Sam agrees with this? Okay. Unfortunately, when it comes to mishandling politics, we are not done yet. I know, but bear with me. The final issue, politically, with the show is Falcon's drops of political knowledge. If there is any evidence of the stupidity and absolutely amateur levels of writing, it has to be these little nuggets of truth Falcon drops. Just in case the writers did not drive home the point enough, they have Falcon drop lines that you would expect to hear from a college student who has watched 3 hours of political YouTube and now fancies himself a pundit.
Trust me, every time something gets better for one group, it gets worse for another.
Like, really? Every time something gets better for one group, it gets worse for the other? Damn. Didn't know that's how he felt about civil rights.
Violent revolutionaries aren't usually good for anyone's cause.
Usually say of other people with the resources.
Well, we got
Sam, this is the government of the world trying to distribute resources. This is not people hoarding resources. Okay, I don't know. Screw this. Just take the terrorist side already.
Reactivating citizenship, social security, healthcare, basically just managing resources for the refugees who are displaced by the return.
You always used to tell me if you're doing something and it makes you scared, it's probably because it's the right thing. And he fought Nazis, so.
Really? Every time you feel scared, you're probably doing something right?
She's just a kid.
Yes, a kid who kills innocent people. I mean, who wrote this? Who wrote this? This person needs help. They could be a danger to others and themselves. Even after all this bullshit, the meandering action, the stupid terrorists, and the ham-fisted mishandled politics, I could maybe find some positives. After all, the characters could be great. But no, Sam and Bucky are assholes. You would imagine that after all these guys have been through, being stuck-up bitches would be the last thing they do. But you would be wrong. After Falcon gives up the shield, it's given to somebody else, John Walker, who we learn has 3 Medals of Honor and is a Navy SEAL who tested off the charts for everything. So, generally a pretty good guy. Understandably, Sam is pissed off, but he goes on to blow up any friendship or partnership with John Walker without even knowing him. This goes for Bucky as well. Even though John Walker saves them and offers to work with them, on top of being kind to them, Falcon and Bucky just assume he is a bad guy and refuse. Only after extending his hand on multiple occasions and getting rejected numerous times does he eventually sever ties. But no, John Walker is the bad guy. For all he knows, Falcon willingly gave up the mantle, so it would be unreasonable for him to understand what's going on. But the implications go beyond that. Because Falcon did not get the shield and Bucky does not like that it went to Walker, both of them refuse to work with him. They refuse to put their personal feelings aside to deal with the terrorist threat. This is not a guarantee, but surely having all of them work together would have given results a lot faster. But I guess their ego is more important than stopping terrorists. Would Steve do the same? I doubt it. After this, Bucky and Falcon look for ways to get the shield back, and when they find an opportunity, they do not hesitate. Shortly after John Walker finds himself at his lowest point, where his friend has just been killed, saving his life, and now having his revenge, being condemned, while being circulated on the internet, Bucky and Sam find their opportunity. Instead of helping their brother-in-arms get through this hard time and back on his feet, they instruct him to leave the shield. John realizes what's actually happening and calls them out, and attempts to de-escalate by telling them they don't have to do this.
You gotta give me the shield, man.
So that's what this is. He almost got me.
You made a mistake.
You don't want to do this.
And this is Bucky's response.
Yeah, we do.
Even throughout the fight, he laments about the partnership they could have had. But, he's the evil one. I don't even know at this point. John Walker, throughout the season, has attempted only to do the right thing, with his largest sins being killing a terrorist and touching the shoulder of the Dora Milaje, which obviously justifies them trying to kill him. His evil decision is repeated again when Sharon kills another flag smasher with Mercury, and neither of them have any issues with that. Yes, she's not Captain America, but it's not like Captain America has killed anybody. This is where they leave him. The only thing they cared about is the shield.
Yes, I think it works.
Which brings us to quite an odd error the show makes. This show is obsessed with the shield, or the characters are. Now, don't get me wrong, not only is the shield one of the most iconic weapons in the MCU, to Sam it represents a lot. However, this show and the characters are obsessed with it. Obsession to the point that it seems to dictate his self-worth. Without it, he is nothing, just simply Falcon. But with it, he's everything. This directly flies in the face of most other stories within the MCU, where all stories and characters typically have some story or arc where the character learns that he is more than just the sum of the weapons or the suit. That the reason they are a hero is not because they happen to stumble upon a great piece of gear, but because of the individuals they are.
It's too strong. Without my hammer, I can't.
Are you Thor, the god of hammers? That hammer was to help you control your power, to focus it. It's never your source of strength.
Yeah, let's
No, please, Mr.
Let's have it.
You don't understand. Please, this is all I have. I'm nothing without this suit.
If you're nothing without this suit, then you shouldn't have it.
And then here comes this show to strip all that away. I mean, he is so obsessed with the shield that he just takes it the moment he can justifiably do so. It's a weird shift in the MCU, and one that makes me like the Falcon less, and Bucky.
Let's take the shield, Sam. Let's take the shield and do this ourselves.
We can't just run up on a man, beat him up, and take it.
Yeah, we do.
It seems Sam was only willing to give up the shield so long as no one else got it. But if he knew somebody else would get it, then he would not have made the same decision. Meaning, his primary reason for deciding whether or not to be Captain America is based off if somebody else would be Captain America. And this, to me, is exactly the opposite of what Captain America would do.
Maybe this is something you or Steve will never understand. But can you accept that I did what I thought was right?
The end of this show is the perfect demonstration. Fresh after stealing the shield and the title, Falcon gets to save the day. He returns triumphantly and caps his debut with one of the most sanctimonious speeches I've ever heard, heaped with praise and adulation from all those involved. Meanwhile, there is John Walker, who has his whole life stripped from him after making what can be considered at most a minor mistake. Even after hitting his lowest points, he stands back up to do the right thing. After the battle is complete, he just walks away. No applause, no hogging the spotlight. Just a man doing the right thing. For me, one character clearly exhibits the characteristic of what makes Captain America at his core, while the other seems to think that speeches and the flashy costume and the shield is what makes Captain America. I know which guy deserves the title more. This show simply doesn't do anything well. By itself, it was barely a mediocre show, barely enough effort to pass the time. In the long run, the Captain America storyline has been heavily changed, one that must follow through on having very upfront and blunt politics. And if the politics are as lazily implemented in this upcoming movie as it was in this show, I really don't have interest in watching it. Unless you're a die-hard fan of the MCU, I don't really see much of a point in watching this show. At this point, producing subpar television with the promise that it ties into the larger MCU is simply an excuse for TV shows that can't stand on their own. These shows might get enough attention and praise when they first release, but over the long run, I have a hard time believing that this will be a memorable story within the MCU and just a memorable story, period. Thank you for watching.